Mangwana ni malelepo vukenjani Klekwas Vanave Africa. Welcome to Africa Good Morning, the news and current affairs show, bringing you everything you need to know happening on the African continent and beyond. Today is Tuesday, the 10th of March, and these are some of the stories we'll be looking at. Mojtaba Khamenei has been appointed as Iran's new supreme leader, and this is after the death of his father, Ali Khamenei. Kenya flood death toll nearly doubles to 42 as heavy rains devastate Nairobi. Kenya flood death toll, as I said, doubles, but what is a result of that is that tourists have had to be evacuated from the country. Nigeria is set to host the signing ceremony for Intra-African Trade Fair 2027. This is in Lagos. Burkina Faso launches $64 billion development plan for 2026 to 2030. Cocoa crisis leaves West African farmers unpaid, and this is despite high chocolate prices. We will also be joined by Talent Gore as she delivers the Zimbabwe Report, including how the potential blockage at the Strait of Hormuz is going to be affecting fuel prices in the country. We do know that from Namibia, on front of Namibian Sun's page today, Namibia has got about 3 months of fuel supply in stock, and it doesn't solely get fuel from that area. So we're going to be keeping an eye on what's happening in the Middle East and, of course, how it's affecting the continent. My name is Ashwin Berry. We'll get into our top stories shortly.
Every weekday evening for the Evening Review as we unpack the issues shaping Namibia. From politics and economics to culture and community life, our team delivers sharp analysis, expert insights and conversations with Namibians across society. It's not just the headlines, it's the full picture. Stay informed and engaged with the Evening Review.
Let's get into our top stories. Mojtaba Khamenei has been appointed the new supreme leader of Iran's Islamic Republic following the death of his father, Ali Khamenei, who was killed aged 86 during the first wave of U.S.-Israeli airstrikes on Tehran that triggered the war in the Middle East on February 28. The 56-year-old figure is described as a discreet personality who represents continuity of his father's hardline leadership. Although he held no official position during his father's rule, Mojtaba Khamenei was long suspected of operating behind the scenes at the center of power in Iran. He is considered close to conservative circles, particularly through his ties with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which swiftly pledged allegiance to the new leader. Soon after his appointment, endorsements were also issued by President Masoud Pezeshkian, the armed forces and the judiciary. His real influence had long been debated among Iranians and diplomats because he rarely appeared at official ceremonies or in the media. Iran's Assembly of Experts announced his selection in a statement published, marking a transition to the Islamic Republic's third supreme leader. Now we swing over to Kenya to talk about the devastating floods in the country. The death toll from heavy rainfall and flooding in Kenya's capital Nairobi and other areas has nearly doubled to 42, according to a government statement issued late this week. Now, intense rains that began on Friday triggered widespread flooding that caused some people to drown, swept away vehicles and disrupted traffic at the country's largest airport. The previous death toll had been reported at 23 before the latest update from authorities. Emergency workers from several agencies, including the military, continued search and rescue operations across the country. Geoffrey Kiringa Ruku, Minister for Public Service and Human Capital Development, said the search mission was still underway as multi-agency emergency teams worked to ensure that the bodies of all flood victims are located and retrieved. Authorities also reported extensive damage to infrastructure and livelihoods caused by the flooding. At least 172 vehicles that had been swept away by floodwaters have been recovered so far. Now we talk about how this has affected tourism in Kenya. Tourists and staff were airlifted from a national reserve in Kenya, and this is after the severe flooding struck the eastern African country during heavy rains. Mark Goss, Chief Executive of the Mara Elephant Project Trust, explained that the Mara River and the Talent River had burst their banks, and this was days earlier, forcing many tourists and camp staff to evacuate camps before the worst of the downpour. Now, authorities said most visitors in the Maasai Mara National Reserve in southwestern Kenya had already left before the heaviest rains arrived. Local media reported that at least 42 people had died in the flooding. As we said, we know that the heavy rainfall began on Friday and continued throughout the weekend. Kenya has experienced persistent heavy rains since late February, marking the start of the country's long rains season. Now, Nigeria will host the opening ceremony of confirming the country, as the host of the 2027 Intra-African Trade Fair known as IATF 2027. Now, this event formally established Nigeria's role in hosting Africa's major trade and investment platform and reinforcing commitments to expanding intra-African trade and advancing implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The signing involves the federal government of Nigeria, the African Export-Import Bank, the African Union Commission, and the AFCFTA Secretariat. IATF 2027 will mark the 5th edition of the trade fair and is expected to gather thousands of exhibitors, buyers, investors, and policymakers from across Africa and the diaspora. The event aims to catalyze trade and investment deals, facilitate exchanges of trade and market information, promote industrial partnerships, and encourage cross-border investment connected to Africa's industrialization agenda. All right, let's talk about how the war in Iran is affecting global oil prices. Crude oil prices climbed past $100 a barrel as disruption linked to the Iran war continued to affect global energy supply. Oil futures surged above the $100 mark when trading opened on Sunday evening, with Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate gaining around 30% and pushing prices close to $120 overnight. The spike represented the largest one-day jump in oil prices since 2020. Markets had already been tense during the previous week, but sentiment shifted sharply after reports that major producers, Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates, had begun reducing output while storage facilities filled rapidly following the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Iraq had also started production cuts earlier. Brent crude was trading at around $107 a barrel in early Monday trading, while WTI crude was near $102. Analysts highlighted the Strait of Hormuz, which carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply, as a critical focal point. Disruptions to shipping through the strait have expanded concerns about wider global oil logistics and continuing pressure on international energy markets. And we'll be looking at that story particularly in the context of Zimbabwe once Talent Gore joins us right after the weather. Now, before Talent gives us the update with regards to the fuel prices in Zimbabwe, Acting Minister of Energy and Power Development, Dr. Jenfan Moswere, had this to say about Zimbabwe's fuel reserves in Parliament.
What contingency measures does the Minister of Energy have with the imminent blockade if the conflict persists?
Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, said the Minister of Energy presented a report indicating the level of our stocks that we are holding in the country, both diesel, petrol, including Jet A1 for our aeroplanes. And we also were briefed about the stocks that are in transit between our country and Beira, and also the ships that are about to dock in Beira. It shows we have some stocks that can take us for the next 2 to 3 months, and the government is making all necessary arrangements, Mr. Speaker, say, to ensure that if the conflict extends, we will be able to get fuel for our operations in the country, including LPG gas.
But if conflict should persist, considering it will increase voyage time around the Cape of Good Hope, that means also the prices is going to go up. Is the ministry able to cater for that increment in price and supply the nation for our development trajectory?
Prices are a function of supply and demand. For as long as our supply routes are disrupted, obviously the prices will be responding. Already some of the routes, I think we are all aware that as a result of the conflict, there are some routes that have since been closed. And obviously as a result, prices will be responding.
And I wanted to find out, given maybe the likelihood of the geopolitical tensions to continue, do we have any government policy to ensure that we buy some of our petroleum products within SADC as part of our SADC trade policy?
Mr. Speaker, because we are now in a crisis, there's nothing that can stop us to scout for availability of the product from within SADC. It's something that I will take to the minister to ascertain if we can have some stocks within SADC, and also the other modalities that follows after ascertaining the quantities that can be obtained within SADC.
Now, Talent Gore has had some significant network disruptions in Zimbabwe, but she did manage to send us her updates, and I will go through them. Continuing with the story of fuel, the Zimbabwe Energy Regulatory Authority, ZERA, announced significant fuel price increases effective March 4, 2026, with diesel rising to $1.77 per liter, and this is from $1.52, and petrol blend to $1.71 per liter from $1.56 a liter, attributed to escalating global oil prices amid Middle East geopolitical tensions. The hikes, up 16.45% for diesel, have prompted commuter omnibus operators to warn of imminent fare increases. Commuters in Harare and other cities face higher transport costs, exacerbating living expenses despite government intervention to cushion the full impact. Now, the 2026 tobacco marketing season officially commenced in early March, operating under the established auction and contract system as outlined by the Tobacco Industry and Marketing Board, TIMB. Now, auction sales began on March 4 with ongoing efforts to ensure fairer pricing and timely payments to growers. While previous seasons highlighted low initial prices affecting targeting smallholder farmers who dominate production. Industry measures aim to boost transparency and returns. Farmers remain cautious, hoping for improved averages amid global market dynamics and local regulatory enhancements. Now, the conversation about minerals has been ongoing in Zimbabwe. We know that the president put a decree last week to say that lithium could not be exported. Now, Vice President Constantino Chiwenga has strongly criticized the ongoing export of raw minerals without value addition, stating that if Zimbabwe fails to beneficiate its resources, future generations will spit on our graves. Speaking recently amid discussions on banning raw exports like lithium, he urged industrialization and local processing to retain wealth and develop rural communities. The remarks highlight concerns over foreign exploitation of Zimbabwe's vast mineral riches, calling for a legacy of sustainable development rather than plunder. And presidential amnesty has freed up to 4,000 prisoners in Zimbabwe. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has previously ordered amnesties to decongest Zimbabwe's prisons, notably releasing over 4,000 inmates, including around 4,270 in 2023 and more than 4,000 in 2024. Targeting non-serious offenders, women, juveniles, and those with disabilities or short sentences served. These clemency orders excluded violent criminals and aimed at humanitarian relief and prison management. While no new large-scale releases are expected, beyond this, the policy does reflect ongoing efforts to address overcrowding, though some freed individuals faced rearrests for new offenses. So that's been the Zimbabwe Report, sent through to us by Talent Gore. We unfortunately do not have the privilege of seeing her face in this particular broadcast, but we assure you that next week she'll be back breaking down the news and dissecting it for us from Harare, Zimbabwe. You are with Africa. Good morning. We're going to take a break before we return with economic news.
This week's decisions, today's debates, tomorrow's consequences. The agenda puts the spotlight on Namibia's most pressing issues and the people driving them. From headline makers to groundbreakers, we bring you voices and perspectives at the center of the national conversation. One story, one interview, the depth you'll not find anywhere else. That is the agenda. Every weekday evening for the evening review as we unpack the issues shaping Namibia. From politics and economics to culture and community life, our team delivers sharp analysis, expert insights, and conversations with Namibians across society. It's not just the headlines, it's the full picture. Stay informed and engaged with the evening review.
In a world where politicians promise the moon and deliver potholes, where democracy sometimes arrives in camouflage and ballots often look like formalities, one show dares to laugh with Africa, at Africa, and sometimes for Africa. This is Second Take, your weekly dose of political satire with an African soul and a global edge. From coups disguised as press briefings to ministers moonwalking past accountability, we serve the real news with sharper writing. Each week we bring you the TikTok of the week, because sometimes the revolution is vertical, and the heartwarming moment of the week to remind us that not everything is burning. We also sit down with the bold, the brilliant, and the brave, voices that question power, stir thought, and spark laughter. Because when the headlines are wild, the leaders are louder, and the truth is lost in translation, we all need a second take. Right, let's get into economic news as we start with Burkina Faso. The country has released and rather adopted a new national development plan covering the years 2026 to 2030 with a total value of $64 billion aimed at transforming the economy and strengthening stability. The 5-year framework represents a significant increase compared with earlier national plans and is designed to promote inclusive growth. Investment spending and capital transfers account for 34.5% of the total funding, while additional financing needs are projected at 30.3% of the overall cost. The strategy is built around 4 main priorities: strengthening security and social cohesion, reforming governance and state institutions, developing human capital, and expanding infrastructure to support economic growth. Now we move over to cocoa. And cocoa farmers in West Africa are facing severe hardship, even as chocolate prices have risen globally. In Ghana and Ivory Coast, where much of the world's cocoa is produced, many farmers say they have not been paid for months. The crisis followed a surge in cocoa prices during 2024. That was later followed by a sharp fall in international prices. Because state regulators in both countries set the price paid to farmers in advance, the collapse left beans around 40% more expensive than international traders were willing to pay. The result has been warehouses full of unsold cocoa while farmers struggle to cover costs. Ghana Cocoa Board had set a guaranteed price of nearly $5,300 per ton, but later reduced it to close to $3,500, and this is to manage mounting debt estimated at $3 billion. Payment delays are believed to be affecting around 800,000 farmers and many rural communities that depend on cocoa income. Thank you for watching Africa Good Morning on DSTV 285, GOTV 25, oneup2.com, Network Media Hub, and NTV Africa. That's Africa with a K. We'll be back tomorrow bringing you the news from Botswana as Rorisang Mohojwe delivers the Botswana Report. Glenera Shipura will be taking over the show for tomorrow. But if you stay glued to your screens, I'll be right back at 8:30 a.m. for a very special broadcast. We won't tell you too much about it right now. What we will leave you with is the economic indicators. Swera Zvakanaka.